The storm raged like a beast unleashed, its violent fury crashing against the ancient redwood trees, each thunderclap more deafening than the last. The skies split open in a flash of blinding white light, casting a ghostly glow over the forest. In the heart of this chaos, a small figure darted between the shadows, her breath ragged and shallow, her tiny heart pounding as loud as the storm around her. Emily Evans, no older than 5, was drenched to the bone. Her nightgown clung to her small frame, streaked with mud and blood from the jagged branches that reached out to grab her. Barefoot, her feet were raw, torn by roots and rocks as she ran deeper into the forest, blindly fleeing the nightmare she'd just witnessed. Behind her, the voices of men echoed through the storm, cold, commanding, searching. "Find her! Don't let anyone escape." The words were sharp, angry, punctuated by the crack of thunder that seemed to crack open the very earth. Welcome to the Heart Force channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through dog stories. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video. And if you have any stories about my loyal friend, please share them with us. Emily pressed herself against the massive trunk of a redwood, her body shaking with fear. The flashlight beams from the men's search spread out before her, cutting through the downpour. They were close, too close. She could see them, the men who had just taken everything from her, who had taken her parents. A flash of lightning illuminated the night, casting the scene in an eerie light. There, between the trees, Emily saw them. Her parents, Sarah and David Evans, stood firm, their faces full of fear but also defiance. Her mother clutched a bundle of research papers to her chest, shaking her head at Maxwell's men. "You can't hide this forever, Maxwell. People will know what you're doing to these forests." Sarah's voice rang out as she stood her ground against the approaching threat. David stood between his wife and the men, his hands raised in a futile gesture of peace. "Please, just let us go," he pleaded. "We'll stop, we'll stay silent." But the gunshots were louder than his words. As if the storm wasn't enough, the crack of gunfire shattered the air. And Emily watched in horror as her parents crumpled to the ground. Her scream was swallowed whole by the wind, and for a moment, everything went silent, save for the pouring rain. Heavy footsteps approached, and Emily's body went rigid. She didn't dare move. They were coming for her now. She was next. Without thinking, without a plan, she ran. She ran into the pitch-black forest, her tiny body weaving between trees and branches, the rain smacking against her skin. She could feel the wet earth beneath her feet, and the pain of every new scratch and bruise was ignored as her terror pushed her forward. But it didn't last long. Emily's legs, weak and trembling, soon gave out, and she collapsed in a hollow beneath a towering redwood. The storm above her was relentless, but there was another sound now, something different. Low, menacing growls broke through the chaos. Emily froze. Her eyes met a pair of glowing yellow eyes in the darkness. And then, the unmistakable shape of a wolf emerged from the shadows, a massive gray figure. The wolf's eyes locked onto her, and for a moment, Emily thought the end had come. But the growl wasn't for her. It was a warning. The alpha wolf stepped forward, its body scarred, its presence commanding. It was Papa Wolf, the leader of the pack, the one who would protect her. Emily's breath caught in her throat, but she couldn't look away. Behind him, the pack emerged. 5 more wolves, their eyes fixed on her, their presence a living barrier between her and the dangers of the storm and the men hunting her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. For the first time since her world had been torn apart, she felt safe. The wolves surrounded her, their warm bodies shielding her from the raging storm and from the violence that had just taken her family. She was no longer alone. Papa Wolf stepped forward, sniffing at the air, then at Emily's trembling hand. The bond formed in that moment was stronger than anything Emily could have understood. It wasn't just survival anymore. This was protection, this was family. The pack circled her, and Emily could feel the soft nuzzles against her skin. Her heart slowed, and for the first time that night, she felt a flicker of hope. The ancient trees watched silently, the storm raging on, but for Emily, the world had shifted. She was no longer just a frightened child running from a storm. She was part of something larger, something wild, something alive. And so, in the deepest heart of the redwood forest, a bond was formed that would change everything. Emily woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving only a few heavy drops splashing onto the forest floor, mingling with the earthy scent of the redwood trees. Her small body, though still bruised and battered from her flight through the storm, lay nestled against the base of a massive redwood, its roots creating a natural shelter. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint musk of the pack, a lingering warmth that still clung to her skin. She wasn't alone. Papa Wolf lay nearby, his massive form stretched out protectively in front of her, his glowing eyes ever watchful. The pack was spread out around her, their bodies close enough to form a barrier, yet not suffocating, just enough to shield her from the world outside. The young girl had fallen asleep almost instantly, her exhaustion taking over. Now she stirred slightly, still trembling from the cold, but also from the nightmarish memories that clung to her thoughts like shadows. The wolves had saved her, but in a way, they had also kept her from facing the pain of what had happened. She could still hear her mother's voice in her head, calling out to her father as they stood their ground, fighting for something bigger than themselves. Her mother's fierce green eyes, her father's protective hands, those images were burned into her memory. But now in the forest, in the midst of the wolves, Emily could feel something else, something new. It was a strange comfort, one she had never known. The wolves weren't just animals, weren't just predators. They were family. They were her family now, bound together by a sense of survival and, somehow, an unspoken understanding. As the morning light began to filter through the towering trees, Emily pushed herself up, her muscles protesting against the movement. She had grown stronger, more accustomed to the wild, even in just the short time she had spent with the pack. Papa Wolf's watchful eyes followed her every move as she slowly stood, brushing dirt from her nightgown. It was then that the pack stirred. Luna, the alpha female, moved closer to Emily, her amber eyes filled with the same protectiveness Emily had come to know from Papa Wolf. The rest of the pack, Shadow, Storm, River, and Star, followed suit, forming a loose circle around her. They weren't just guarding her from the dangers of the forest. They were guiding her, teaching her in ways words could never explain. Emily's gaze flicked between them, understanding that, somehow, these wolves knew her, and they were going to help her survive this new world she had found herself in. It wasn't long before she felt the first stirrings of hunger. Her stomach growled quietly, a reminder that she hadn't eaten since the night her life had been shattered. As though sensing her need, Luna moved off toward the forest's edge, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Emily followed at a distance, her small feet slipping over the damp earth. Papa Wolf remained by her side, his steps steady, and she trusted him. She trusted all of them, even if she didn't fully understand why. The forest was alive in a way she had never noticed before. Every leaf, every rustle of the wind, every small animal scurrying through the underbrush held new significance. Emily felt like she was part of something ancient, something that transcended the world she had once known. Soon, Luna returned, her mouth holding a small rabbit, still warm. She dropped it before Emily, who looked up at Papa Wolf, her eyes questioning. "It's okay." A soft voice, her father's voice, echoed in her mind. "Wolves are nature's guardians, Emily. They protect the wild, and in return, the wild offers its bounty." Emily blinked away the memory. She wasn't sure if it was the storm or the wolves or her own hunger, but she felt connected to the world around her in a way she hadn't before. The instinct to survive, to adapt, was strong now. As she crouched beside the rabbit, her hands trembling, she realized something. She wasn't just surviving with the wolves. They had become her family. And as she tore into the rabbit, her teeth biting into the raw meat, she felt the wildness settle within her. She was no longer just a child lost in the storm. She was part of something bigger now, part of the pack. The pack that would teach her how to live. Hours later, as the day wore on and the sun began to dip low in the sky, Emily felt something shift within her. She had already learned so much. She had learned how to move quietly through the forest, how to listen for danger, and how to trust her instincts. She had learned how to rely on the pack, but she also knew that eventually she would have to face the world beyond the forest. She would have to face the truth about what happened to her parents. But as the night approached and the stars began to pierce the dark sky above, Emily felt the weight of the day lift. Papa Wolf sat beside her, his large form a comforting presence. The pack surrounded them, their energy calm, their gaze watchful but peaceful. In that moment, Emily knew one thing for sure. No matter what the future held, she wouldn't face it alone. The days blurred together in a cycle of survival and adaptation. Emily's body grew stronger as she spent more time with the wolves. The pack taught her how to navigate the dense forest, how to recognize the sounds of danger, and how to connect with the world in ways she never thought possible. She could hear the subtle rustle of animals hidden in the underbrush, feel the shift in the wind before a storm, and, most surprisingly, communicate with the wolves in ways that felt both wild and strangely human. Papa Wolf led her, Luna watched over her, and the rest of the pack, Shadow, Storm, River, and Star, became her companions, her new family. She moved with them as if she had always belonged in the forest, her once tender feet now calloused from running through the harsh terrain. Every part of her body had adapted to the wild, and Emily, though still a child, had learned to thrive in a world of shadows, survival, and untamed beauty. But as the days passed, the weight of her parents' death began to grow heavier. Emily could hear the distant echoes of their voices, her mother's gentle, firm tone, her father's reassuring presence. They were still with her, in her heart, in the forest. They had fought for this land, for the forest, for the creatures within it. And now, it was her turn to carry on their fight. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the forest floor, Emily found herself standing at the edge of a clearing. The wolves had stopped their hunt, sensing something. They stood, silent and alert, their eyes fixed on her. The moment felt significant, as if the forest itself had paused to give her a choice. Her hand instinctively went to her side, where a small branch lay. It wasn't much, but it was a weapon, a reminder of the old world, the world she had lost. Her chest tightened as the sound of approaching voices broke the silence. Emily's heart raced. The pack was already in position, their low growls reverberating in the air. They had sensed the threat before she had. Her parents had once told her to listen to the forest, to trust it. And now, as her instincts kicked in, she realized that they had been right. The forest was alive. The forest was her ally. She crouched, watching through the brush as two figures emerged from the trees. They were men, dressed in weathered camouflage, their movements deliberate as they scanned the area. Emily's blood ran cold. These weren't the first people she had encountered since the storm, but they were different. These men carried weapons, dangerous, familiar weapons, weapons meant to hurt, to destroy. The pack moved silently, a shadowy blur of strength and unity. Papa Wolf was at the front, his scarred muzzle held high, his posture one of dominance. The men didn't notice the pack at first. Their attention focused on something beyond the trees. But Emily could see them clearly, their faces hardened with purpose, eyes sharp and intent on something she couldn't yet understand. Then, a voice rang out from the distance. "Come on, we gotta find her. The girl's out there somewhere." A chill ran through Emily. They were looking for her. The men weren't just searching for animals. They were hunting her. Without thinking, Emily moved, her body instinctively following the pack's silent lead. She knew what she had to do. She had to get away. The men had come for her, and the forest would shield her, but only if she kept moving. Papa Wolf's eyes flicked to hers, and in that fleeting moment, Emily understood. They were protecting her, but they couldn't do it alone. She had to fight. A sharp, protective growl echoed from the pack, and suddenly, the wolves lunged forward, their bodies moving as one. The men, caught off guard, turned quickly, but the wolves were too fast, too powerful. In an instant, the forest was alive with the sound of growls, the flash of claws, and the heavy thud of paws against the forest floor. Emily watched in awe as the wolves moved with precision. Luna darted around the men, forcing them into a corner. Shadow, Storm, and River flanked them, their eyes locked onto their prey. Papa Wolf stood tall, his gaze fixed on the leader of the group, the man who had raised his weapon toward Emily. But as the man hesitated, the wolves stopped. Emily felt the tension in the air. The wolves weren't just predators, they were guardians. They weren't here to kill. They were here to protect. The man took a step back, lowering his weapon, his hands shaking. His eyes flicked between the wolves, and then to Emily, standing at the edge of the clearing, her small figure poised like a wild spirit. She was no longer the terrified child who had fled through the storm. She was something else now. Emily took a slow, deliberate step forward. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, the bond she had formed with the pack, said everything. "Leave," she said, her voice low but clear, blending human words with a slight growl, a sound that was almost wolf-like. The wolves stood at her side, a barrier between her and the men. The men hesitated, their eyes wide, unsure of what they were facing. After a tense moment, one of them turned, muttering under his breath, "This ain't worth it. Let's go." They retreated, their footsteps fading into the forest. The pack, though alert, remained calm. Emily's heart still pounded, but she could feel the pack's strength, their unwavering loyalty. They had protected her, and in return, she had protected them. As the forest returned to its quiet rhythm, Emily sank to her knees. Her small hands pressed to the earth. She could feel the pulse of the land beneath her fingers, the heartbeat of the ancient redwoods echoing in her soul. She had come to understand something profound in that moment. This was her home now. Not just the place, but the people, her family, the wolves. And she would protect it just as her parents had. Days turned to weeks, and as the weeks passed, Emily became more deeply entrenched in the world of the pack. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. She was changing, evolving, becoming part of the forest in ways she had never imagined. The wolves, once just protectors, were now her teachers. They taught her to understand the language of the forest, the subtle signs that indicated danger, the patterns of the animals she had once known only as fleeting shadows. Every day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new triumphs. But with these changes, Emily began to feel the weight of her parents' deaths press more heavily on her. She could no longer ignore the gaping hole they had left in her heart. She had learned to survive, but survival wasn't enough. She needed answers. She needed to know what had happened to them. One day, as Emily sat beside Papa Wolf, her eyes staring into the depths of the forest, she felt something shift in the air. A cold breeze swept through the trees, carrying with it a familiar scent, one that made her blood run cold. The men were back, but this time Emily didn't feel fear. She felt anger, the kind of anger that surged through her like wildfire, burning away all the uncertainty and the sadness. The men who had killed her parents had returned, and now they would face the forest's wrath. Papa Wolf rose from his resting spot, his posture rigid and commanding. Luna moved to his side, her eyes filled with the same fierce protectiveness. The pack stirred, their low growls vibrating through the ground beneath Emily's feet. They were ready. Emily stood, her small frame now steady and determined. She knew what had to be done. She couldn't run anymore. The wolves had taught her how to fight, how to survive in a world that wanted to destroy everything she held dear. It was time for her to face the truth. The pack moved like shadows, their bodies fluid and powerful. Emily followed, her legs steady beneath her as she stepped forward. She wasn't the scared little girl who had stumbled into the forest days ago. She was a part of this place, a part of the pack. And now, the pack was going to fight for her family, for the forest, for everything they had lost. As they moved deeper into the forest, Emily's eyes scanned the trees, her senses heightened. The men were near, their voices low and hurried as they searched for something, someone. But Emily knew where they were. She could hear their breathing, their footsteps crunching on the underbrush. They were close. She raised her hand, signaling the pack to stop. The wolves obeyed, their bodies crouching low as they melted into the shadows, becoming one with the forest. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but her fear had turned to resolve. This was no longer about survival. This was about justice. She moved forward alone, her bare feet silent on the soft forest floor. The wolves stayed behind her, their presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone, that she was never truly vulnerable. Emily was the bridge between two worlds, the human world and the wild world of the forest. And as she approached the men, she knew that the pack would stand by her, no matter what happened. The men came into view, their flashlights darting across the trees as they scoured the area. Emily stopped just out of their line of sight, her breath steady. She didn't need a rush. The wolves were already in place, waiting for a signal. And then, just as she stepped forward, the pack attacked. The men turned in shock as the wolves emerged from the shadows, their growls vibrating through the air like a storm on the horizon. The men raised their weapons, but it was too late. The wolves were faster, stronger, and far more coordinated than the men could have ever anticipated. Papa Wolf charged first, his massive form moving with incredible speed. He collided with the first man, knocking him to the ground with a bone-crushing force. Luna followed, her eyes fierce, her growls like thunder as she took down another. The rest of the pack moved in, their bodies moving like fluid shadows, taking down the remaining men with precision. Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, watching with a strange sense of calm. She didn't feel the fear she had once known. She felt only the weight of what had been done to her parents, to her family, to the land she now called home. The wolves fought with an intensity that came from more than just hunger or instinct. It came from a deep-seated desire to protect their own, protect the forest, protect the legacy of those who had come before them. As the last man fell to the ground, the wolves stood over their fallen enemies, their eyes glowing in the dim light of the forest. Emily slowly walked forward, her feet light against the earth. She could feel the tension in the air, the heavy silence that followed the chaos. The pack turned toward her, their heads low, as if seeking her approval. She looked down at the men, their weapons scattered around the ground. She could feel no triumph, no victory, only the deep, gnawing ache of loss. Her parents were still gone. The men had been dealt with, but the damage had already been done. She could feel their absence like a weight in her chest, a constant reminder of the injustice that had been done to them. Papa Wolf stepped forward, his scarred face filled with a calm understanding. He moved closer to Emily, his presence comforting, as if telling her that this was not the end. There was more to be done, more to fight for. The bond between Emily and the pack had deepened in that moment. She was no longer just a child lost in the storm. She was a protector now, just like them. The wolves, the guardians of the forest, had saved her, and now she would save them. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of silence and reflection. The forest, once a place of fear and confusion, had become something new for Emily. It had transformed into her sanctuary, her home, a place of understanding. She was no longer a frightened child fleeing through the rain. She was a part of something larger, a community, a pack, a family. But despite the comfort she found in the wolves, a quiet sorrow lingered in the depths of her heart. Her parents' deaths were still a wound that wouldn't heal. The men who had come into the forest, Maxwell's hired thugs, had been dealt with, but they were only the tip of the iceberg. Emily knew, deep down, that there was more to the story, more to uncover. Her parents had fought for the forest, for its future, and in their fight, they had left behind a legacy, one that Emily now carried with her, a torch she would never let extinguish. The pack sensed her grief, and they surrounded her with an unwavering presence. Papa Wolf never left her side, and Luna was always nearby, her calm gaze never leaving Emily. It was in these moments, with the wolves surrounding her, that Emily began to understand the depth of her parents' sacrifice. She wasn't just surviving in the forest. She was carrying on their work, their fight, for the future of the land they had fought to protect. But despite the peace the forest offered, Emily knew she couldn't remain hidden forever. The world outside was still waiting for her. She could feel the stirrings of the inevitable, the men who would come for her again, the answer she needed to uncover, the justice that would never come unless she took it into her own hands. The day arrived when Emily could no longer ignore it. She could hear the distant hum of machines in the forest, the unmistakable sound of logging trucks. The destruction that had taken her parents' lives had continued unabated, a constant presence at the edges of her world. She knew that she had to face it, had to return to the world beyond the forest. Papa Wolf was at her side, his eyes steady as she made the decision. The pack surrounded her, their growls a quiet but constant reminder of the strength they offered her. They had always been with her, and now they would stand with her in the battle to come. As Emily made her way through the forest, her heart heavy with determination, the memories of her parents burned bright. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and sure, telling her stories of the ancient trees, the creatures who lived within them, and the delicate balance that kept the forest alive. She remembered her father's gentle touch, the way he had taught her to listen to the wind, to read the signs in the leaves, and to honor the land that sustained them. The further she walked, the stronger her resolve became. She was no longer the child who had fled the storm. She was Emily Evans, the daughter of Sarah and David Evans, the protectors of the forest. And now, it was her turn to carry the torch. The sound of the logging trucks grew louder, a harsh reminder of the battle that lay ahead. Emily didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, the wolves moving with her in perfect harmony. Together, they approached the clearing where the trucks were parked, their engines running as workers moved about, oblivious to the impending confrontation. Papa Wolf growled low, and the pack stepped into view, their eyes gleaming in the dim light of the forest. The workers froze, their eyes wide with fear as they saw the wolves, standing like sentinels between them and the forest they were trying to destroy. Emily, standing tall among the pack, felt her heart steady. She wasn't alone. The forest was with her. One of the workers, a man in his 50s, stepped forward, his face pale. "What are you doing here, girl?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "You can't stop us. This is our land now." Emily's gaze hardened, and she stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. She could feel the wolves moving behind her, the weight of their protection a constant presence. She wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for her parents, for the forest, for everything they had fought for. "You don't belong here," Emily said, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that only someone who had lived through the worst could understand. "This land isn't yours to take. It belongs to the forest, to the creatures who call a home. It's time for you to leave." The man took a step back, his face now a mask of confusion and fear. What are you going to do? You think these wolves will stop us?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Papa Wolf took a step forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the man. The wolves circled the clearing, their eyes fixed on the workers. It was clear now there was no escape. They couldn't fight the pack. They couldn't fight the forest. The man's voice wavered as he called to the others. "Get in the trucks. We need to leave now." But it was too late. The pack had made their stand, and the workers knew that the forest was not a place they could control anymore. Emily turned and walked back into the forest, the pack following behind her. She didn't need to look back. The workers would leave. The forest was safe for now, but she knew this battle wasn't over. The fight for the future of the forest, for the memory of her parents, had only just begun. As the sun set behind the towering redwoods, Emily stopped at the edge of the clearing. She turned to Papa Wolf, her heart swelling with pride and loss all at once. She was still the little girl who had run into the storm, but she was also someone else now, someone who had a purpose, a future, and a family. And as the wolves stood beside her, their eyes watching the horizon, Emily knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, she would never face it alone. The forest had chosen her, and she would protect it as her parents had before her. As Emily's journey unfolds, we witness the powerful connection between humans and nature, the unbreakable bonds of family, and the strength that comes from resilience. Her survival, not just in the wild but through loss and heartache, teaches us the importance of protecting what we love, standing firm in the face of adversity, and embracing the unknown. Emily's story is a reminder that true healing comes from within, from understanding our place in the world, and from the connections we form, not just with each other, but with the earth that sustains us. What did you think of Emily's journey? How do you relate to her struggle for survival and healing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel for more inspiring tales of strength and connection. The sky raged above the quiet town of Ashford, its fury unleashed in a torrential downpour. The rain hammered against the trees at the edge of the town, where the old cemetery stood forgotten, cloaked in darkness except for the occasional flicker of lightning. The storm seemed to have a life of its own, sweeping through the graves like an unstoppable force, twisting the overgrown weeds around the stone markers. Standing beneath a thick cloak, Henry Foster, a retired doctor in his 60s, trudged through the mud, his boots sinking deeper with each step. The oil lamp in his hand barely cut through the dark, casting fleeting shadows over the weathered tombstones. He had been coming to this cemetery for years, a ritual born of respect for the dead and a quiet hope that he might feel connected to the family he lost long ago. But tonight, something felt different. The wind howled through the towering trees, their gnarled branches creaking under the pressure. Henry paused, straining to hear over the storm's roar. Then, faint but distinct, a sound sliced through the night. A cry. A baby's cry. Welcome to the Heart Force channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through dog stories. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video. And if you have any stories about my loyal friend, please share them with us. His heart skipped a beat. Impossible, he thought. Who would leave a child out here, alone in this storm? With his medical instincts kicking in, Henry's steps quickened, his mind racing as he moved deeper into the cemetery. The rain-soaked graveyard seemed to stretch on endlessly, but the cry grew louder, pulling him toward an old, neglected grave nearly hidden beneath wild vines and moss. There, lying amidst the mud, was an infant wrapped in a soaked cloth, its tiny face pale and shivering, and beside it a dog. Henry's breath caught in his throat. The medium-sized dog, its golden fur drenched from the downpour, was lying next to the baby, its eyes alert and intelligent, watching Henry with an almost human expression. The dog didn't growl or bark. Instead, it simply stared at him, as if asking for help. "Good God," Henry whispered under his breath, crouching beside the baby. The child's lips were turning blue, but there was still the faintest hint of life, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The dog didn't move as Henry gently scooped the infant into his arms. Its eyes never left the baby, a protective stance that made Henry pause. The embroidered cloth wrapped around the child's body held a strange symbol, a delicate, five-petaled flower that seemed to glow faintly even in the storm's gloom. "Who would do this?" Henry murmured, his voice breaking as he held the baby close, trying to warm the tiny form with his coat. The dog shifted, its gaze soft but watchful, and Henry knew then that this was no coincidence. He didn't understand it yet, but something in the air told him this night would change everything. The journey back to Henry's small cottage on the edge of town was slow, treacherous, and filled with uncertainty. The storm made every step a battle. The dog, now trailing closely behind him, occasionally whined, as if urging him to hurry. Its watchful eyes never strayed from the baby in Henry's arms. As Henry made it inside, The warmth of his modest home greeted him like an old friend. He laid the baby on a blanket by the fire, his hands shaking with the urgency of the situation. The dog sat beside the cradle, its attention unwavering, as Henry worked quickly. His medical experience kicked into high gear as he dried the baby and checked for signs of life. The child, though small and fragile, was showing signs of resilience. It wasn't just any child. And the dog? It wasn't just any dog. Henry ran his fingers through the dog's matted fur, a sense of gratitude flowing through him. "Thank you," he said quietly, and for a moment, the dog's eyes softened, as if understanding. Henry's thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. Who had left this child in the graveyard, and why? And what was the significance of the strange symbol? Why was this dog so devoted to the child? It was all too much to process, and yet, as he watched the dog keep its vigilant watch over the baby, Henry felt something stirring deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. In that moment, amidst the storm and the uncertainty, Henry Foster made a silent promise. He would protect this child. He would protect them both, whatever it cost. As the storm raged outside, Henry sat back in his old rocking chair, exhausted but unable to sleep. The baby slept soundly now, wrapped in blankets near the fire, and the dog lay beside her, alert and watchful. Henry's mind swirled with thoughts of the past, of his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Lily, both lost in a tragic car accident 5 years ago. The pain still lingered, sharp and ever-present, but in this strange, impossible moment with the baby and the dog, he felt something else. He felt alive. He felt needed. The dog, which he had begun calling Shadow due to its quiet, protective presence, seemed to sense the shift in Henry's heart. Every so often, it would look up at him, as if reassuring him that they were in this together. And just as Henry was about to drift into a much-needed sleep, he heard it again, the faint cry of the baby. His heart jumped in his chest. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something more familiar. Hope. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the small cottage where Henry and his unexpected guests had found shelter. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with the scent of rain and wet earth. Shadow, the golden dog, stood vigil by the door, his ears perked and eyes scanning the horizon. Henry, though weary, felt a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. The baby, whom he had named Hope, had survived the night. She slept soundly in the makeshift crib beside the hearth, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic breaths. Shadow's protective posture never wavered. It remained by the crib, watching over her with an almost unnatural dedication. Henry's medical training told him that Hope was a fighter. Though small and fragile, she had a strength that was undeniable. But that wasn't the only thing that intrigued him. The strange 5-petaled flower, symbol embroidered into the cloth she had been wrapped in, gnawed at his mind. It wasn't just a decorative pattern. It held meaning, a significance that eluded him, yet felt somehow familiar. As Henry moved to prepare breakfast, his thoughts drifted to the night before. The mystery of Hope's origins weighed heavily on him, but a greater question loomed in his mind. Who was this dog? What kind of training had Shadow undergone to be so dedicated to a child he had never met? The morning passed quietly, the sun rising higher in the sky as the storm clouds broke apart. Henry didn't go to the village today. He stayed in his cottage, nursing his aching heart and adjusting to the strange new reality that had presented itself to him. After breakfast, Henry made a decision. He could no longer remain in the dark about this child. His instinct told him that Hope was no ordinary baby, and Shadow was no ordinary dog. There was something more at play here, something that had brought them together in this strange, unexplainable way. He needed to find answers. The village of Ashford was small, its cobblestone streets lined with quaint shops and homes. Most of the villagers knew Henry, or at least knew of him. He had spent over 30 years as the town's pediatrician, offering both medical advice and a listening ear to the families who came to him. Though his practice had closed after his wife and daughter's tragic deaths, he was still a fixture in the community, respected if somewhat distant. Now, however, Henry found himself at the crossroads of his past and an uncertain future. He couldn't explain to anyone why he had taken in the abandoned child or the dog. The village would never understand. But deep down, he knew this was his purpose now. Henry made his way through the village, Shadow following closely behind. The dog had become an almost constant presence in his life, never straying far from his side. It was as if Shadow understood the gravity of the situation and the responsibility Henry had taken on. It was more than loyalty. It was something deeper, something bound by fate. He first visited Mrs. Thompson, the kind widow who ran the village's general store. She was one of the few people who still called on him for advice, bringing him homemade bread and vegetables in exchange for a quick checkup now and then. "Henry, what on earth is going on?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her eyebrows raised in concern as she saw him enter the store with the baby cradled in his arms and Shadow by his side. "Is that a baby?" Henry nodded, careful to keep his emotions in check. "Yes," he replied quietly. "I found her last night, out in the cemetery." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, and she took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Found her? In the cemetery?" "I know it sounds impossible," Henry said, his voice low. "But there's something I don't understand. She was left there, alone. And this dog," he paused, his gaze shifting to Shadow, who had settled by the door, watchful but calm. "This dog is different. It's been protecting her." Mrs. Thompson glanced at the dog, then back at Henry. "You're saying this dog has been looking after her?" "Yes," Henry replied, his voice steady. "And I intend to find out more about them both. I just don't know where to start." Mrs. Thompson crossed her arms, looking thoughtful. "Well, I've had a few contacts in the village, but you might want to speak with Sarah Johnson, the midwife. She's had experience with babies and, well, unusual circumstances." "Unusual circumstances?" Henry echoed. "Trust me," Mrs. Thompson said with a knowing smile. "She's dealt with more than one mystery over the years. She's a good woman. If anyone can help you understand this, it's her." Later that afternoon, Henry made his way to Sarah Johnson's small cottage on the outskirts of the village. Sarah had been a midwife for over 20 years, delivering babies and offering guidance to young mothers. She was well respected in the village, though a bit of a recluse, preferring the quiet of her home to the hustle and bustle of the town center. When Sarah opened the door, she greeted Henry with a warm smile, but there was an unmistakable curiosity in her eyes as she saw the baby in his arms. "Henry," she said softly, "I wasn't expecting company today. And what's this?" She gestured toward Hope and then to Shadow, who had remained outside, sitting patiently by the door. Henry explained what had happened the previous night, recounting the cry he had heard, the strange symbol on the cloth, and the dog's unusual protective behavior. Sarah listened intently, her face serious. "You're not the first person to find something like this," she murmured. "But a baby in a cemetery? That's rare. Do you think it's connected to something dangerous?" Henry asked, his voice tight with concern. "I don't know yet," Sarah replied, stepping forward to take a closer look at Hope. The baby stirred in Henry's arms, her tiny hand reaching out, as if sensing Sarah's presence. "But I have seen this symbol before." Henry's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward Shadow, who was now pacing near the edge of the property. "It's a family symbol. Well, I've seen it in a few old records, but it's been a long time since I've come across it. And as for the dog," she sighed, "that dog isn't just trained to protect. It's been trained for something more." Henry's mind raced. "Trained for what?" "I don't know yet," Sarah said, her voice trailing off. "But if you're serious about finding answers, Henry, you'll need to look deeper. This child and that dog, they're part of a much bigger story. And it's a story that's not over yet." As Henry left Sarah's cottage, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn back now. The mystery of Hope's origins had only deepened, and the role Shadow played in her life was far from over. But with Sarah's words echoing in his mind, he also knew that his next step would take him deeper into a world of secrets he wasn't sure he was ready for. The weeks following Henry's meeting with Sarah Johnson were filled with questions. questions that seemed to multiply as the days passed. Hope was thriving under his care, but every time he looked at her, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her than met the eye. She was a child, a vulnerable little soul in need of love and protection. Yet there was an undeniable spark in her eyes, as though she carried the weight of a secret far beyond her years. Shadow, too, remained ever-present, steadfast in his protection of the baby. But the dog's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and Henry could sense it. Something was unsettling him. At night, Shadow would pace by the windows, growling softly at any movement in the distance, his instincts sharp and unwavering. During the day, he would lie beside Hope's crib, always alert, always watchful, yet calm. It was as if the dog knew what Henry was only beginning to understand. This child was in grave danger, and that danger was drawing closer. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of work on his medical records, Henry decided to pay another visit to Sarah. He needed answers, and the time had come to dig deeper into the mystery of the baby, the symbol on her cloth, and the dog's unwavering loyalty. Sarah had been hesitant to discuss anything more during their last meeting, but Henry could sense that the time for silence was over. When he arrived at Sarah's cottage, she greeted him with a warm, welcoming smile, but there was something different in her eyes, a hint of concern, as though she was preparing herself for something she knew was coming. "Come in, Henry," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been expecting you." As Henry stepped inside, Sarah motioned for him to sit at the small wooden table by the window. The room was warm, filled with the rich scent of herbs drying by the hearth and the soft flicker of candlelight. It was cozy, intimate, a place where one could easily forget the outside world. "I've been thinking," Henry began, his voice low, "about hope, about the symbol, the dog, everything. I can't shake the feeling that there's something I'm missing. Something important." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression serious. "You're not wrong, Henry. There is something more to this than just a simple case of abandonment. But you need to understand that the truth, it's not something most people are ready for." "What do you mean?" Henry asked, his heart racing. "What truth?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the window where Shadow lay outside, his eyes locked on the horizon. It was as if the dog could sense something in the air, something that Henry hadn't yet perceived. "There's a story behind that child, Henry. A story that's been hidden for a long time. And it's not just her story, it's Shadow's too. They're connected in ways I don't fully understand, but I do know one thing. Their safety is of the utmost importance. If the wrong people find out about them, everything will change." Henry leaned forward, his brow furrowed with worry. "Who are these people? What do you know about them?" Sarah took a deep breath, and for a moment, her eyes seemed distant, as though she were searching for words that would make sense of the tangled web of secrets she was about to reveal. "They're families, Henry, families with influence, power, and wealth, families that will do anything to maintain control. Hope's birth is not an accident. It was planned, but not by anyone with good intentions." Henry's pulse quickened. "Are you saying someone planned her abandonment?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Yes, but it's more complicated than that. Hope's mother, Rebecca, was part of one of these families, one of the powerful families that controls everything in this town. And the people behind her disappearance, and now Hope's, are part of something much darker. The dog, Shadow, he was trained specifically to protect Hope, and he's been waiting for someone like you to find her. Someone who could protect her and understand what's at stake." Henry's mind raced. This was no longer just about finding the truth. It was about survival. For him, for Hope, for Shadow. The family that had orchestrated this web of deceit would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "I don't understand," Henry said, shaking his head. "Why would anyone want to hurt a baby?" "Because of what she represents," Sarah said, her voice cold and calculating. "Hope is not just any child. She's the key to something much bigger, something that could change everything for the families involved. And that's why she's been hidden, and why the dog is here, protecting her. It's not just instinct, Henry. It's by design." Henry felt his stomach churn. He had known that there was something special about Hope, but this was something else. something that could destroy everything he had worked for. The quiet life he had built in the wake of his family's tragic death was slipping away, replaced by a dangerous game of cat and mouse. "What can I do?" Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do I protect her from this?" Sarah looked at him with a heavy gaze, her face lined with years of experience and hidden sorrow. "You have to go to the source. The families that control this town, they're the ones who hold the key to everything. If you want to keep Hope safe, you have to confront them. You have to find out who's behind this and why. And you need to do it before they find her first." Henry's heart pounded in his chest. "I won't let them take her," he said firmly. "I won't let them hurt her." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "Then you have to prepare yourself, Henry. This is bigger than anything you've ever dealt with before. And it's not just your life on the line. It's hers." As Henry left Sarah's cottage, a cold wind began to stir, carrying with it the scent of something far darker than the rain-soaked earth. He glanced at Shadow, who stood by the door, his posture tense, eyes scanning the horizon. The dog seemed to know what was coming, seemed to understand that the next steps they took would either bring them closer to safety or lead them directly into danger. Hope, the baby who had entered his life under the most mysterious of circumstances, was now the key to a story that was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And no matter the cost, Henry knew one thing for certain. He would protect her, even if it meant confronting the very families that controlled everything he had known. The days following his conversation with Sarah Johnson were a blur of tension and quiet resolve. Henry spent most of his time in his small cabin, preparing for the storm that was surely coming. He couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around him, that every step he took to protect Hope and Shadow brought him closer to a confrontation he wasn't sure he was ready for. But there was no turning back now. Hope was thriving. Her laugh had become a sound that filled the cabin with warmth, a contrast to the cold reality that was slowly seeping in. Her first words, "Papa" and "Dog," brought tears to Henry's eyes each time she said them, as if the universe itself was reminding him of the love he had lost and the love he had found. But Shadow was different. The dog's once playful nature had become consumed by a relentless vigilance. At night, he no longer slept peacefully. He would pace the cabin, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every creak in the floorboards. He had become more than a protector. He was a guardian, watching over Hope with an intensity that only deepened as the days went by. Henry knew that the Blackwoods were coming. The wealth and power of their family were not to be underestimated, and their reach stretched far beyond the small village that had once been his quiet refuge. The dog's heightened senses, the way it reacted to the faintest sounds outside, spoke to the danger that loomed just beyond their doorstep. Then came the call, the one Henry had been dreading. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence one afternoon, and, as he opened it, he found a tall, stern-looking man standing before him. The man was dressed in a black suit, his demeanor businesslike and cold. "Dr. Miller?" the man asked, his voice lacking any warmth. "Yes?" Henry replied, his hand instinctively resting on the doorknob, ready to close it if necessary. He could feel the tension in his chest tighten. "My name is Richard Hale. I represent the Blackwood family. They're inquiring about the child you're caring for." "Hope Miller," he said, his eyes scanning the cabin as though he were assessing everything within it, searching for any clue that might give away Henry's plans. Henry stiffened. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Hale's expression didn't change. "We know who she is. The Blackwoods have been searching for her for quite some time, and they've asked that you turn her over to them." "Turn her over?" Henry's voice grew harder. "She's not going anywhere. Dr. Miller," Hale continued, "this isn't a request. It's a formal notice. You've been illegally harboring a child who belongs to my clients. There are documents, you see, that suggest her rightful place is with the Blackwoods. We have every intention of bringing this matter to court, and if it comes to that, I assure you the law will be on their side." Henry's jaw tightened. He glanced back at the cabin, at Hope's crib, where the soft sound of her breathing filled the room. Shadow, sensing the threat, stood beside Henry, growling low in his throat, his eyes never leaving Hale. I don't care what the Blackwoods say, Henry said, his voice steady but firm. Hope is mine. She's my daughter now, and no one is taking her from me. Hale seemed to consider this for a moment before offering a thin smile. I think you'll find that things are not as simple as you believe, Dr. Miller. The Blackwoods have resources you cannot imagine, and they will stop at nothing to get what they want. We'll be back, and we'll bring the full force of the law with us. With that, Hale turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the ground. Henry stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the threat bearing down on him. Shadow, sensing Henry's distress, moved closer, his head resting gently against his leg. The bond between them had deepened over the past few months, and in that moment, it felt unbreakable. Henry wasn't alone, not anymore. Later that evening, Henry sat at the small wooden table, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But inside the cabin, it was quiet. Hope was asleep in her crib, her small form nestled in the warmth of her blankets, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Shadow lay at his feet, his eyes alert, his body tense. The dog had not relaxed since the confrontation with Hale, and Henry knew that the threat was real. He was a doctor, trained to care for others. But he was also a man who had lost everything once. And now, with Hope, he had something worth fighting for. I won't let them take you, Henry whispered to himself, his voice a promise more than a declaration. You're mine. You're safe here. The silence stretched on for a few more minutes before Henry stood up and moved to the window. He peered out into the darkness, the silhouette of the trees swaying in the wind. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. The Blackwoods would come again, and next time, they wouldn't be so easily deterred. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed a flash of movement, a figure barely visible in the darkness, just outside the edge of the forest. His heart skipped a beat. Was it one of the Blackwoods' men, or something else? Shadow's hackles rose immediately, his low growl filling the cabin. Henry's mind raced. He couldn't risk waiting to find out. He needed to act, to move Hope and Shadow to safety before it was too late. As Henry prepared for what might be their final escape, a plan began to form in his mind. The time had come to confront the Blackwoods and take Hope's future into his own hands, no matter the cost. The storm outside had turned violent, wind howling through the trees as Henry prepared for the unimaginable. His heart raced, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was determination. As he checked the small bag he had packed with supplies, his thoughts raced. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protection. Hope was his daughter, and Shadow was her guardian. Just as much a part of their family as any person could be. Come on, boy, Henry whispered, giving Shadow a gentle pat on the head. The dog's gaze met his, steady and unwavering, as though it understood what was at stake. Hope slept soundly in her crib, completely unaware of the dangers closing in. Henry had always worked in medicine, where quick decisions and rational thinking had been his tools. But this was different. This was personal. This was love. The knock at the door came just as the first light of dawn began to break through the storm. Henry's hand instinctively reached for the old hunting rifle he kept by the door. It wasn't for hunting. It was for situations like this. He knew it wouldn't come to violence if he could help it, but the Blackwoods had pushed him too far. They had threatened his family, and now there was no turning back. He opened the door slowly, and there they stood, Alexander and Victoria Blackwood, flanked by two of their burly security men. They looked as polished as ever, their expensive clothes still immaculate despite the rain that poured from the sky, but their eyes held a cold, calculating malice. "We're here for Hope," Alexander said, his tone icy. He held out a stack of papers, the kind of documents that were meant to look official, meant to give their claims weight. Henry stood firm, his back straight. "She's not going anywhere." Victoria's lips twisted into a false smile. "You don't understand, Dr. Miller. This isn't just about you or me. It's about the future of a family, of an heir who's been kept from us." "An heir?" Henry's voice shook with barely contained rage. "She's a child, not a pawn in your games. This is about love, not money. And you're not taking her. Shadow, ever the protector, positioned himself between Henry and the Blackwoods. His body tensed, and his growl rumbled low and dangerous. The dog had never been more than a loyal companion, but now, as Henry's most trusted ally, Shadow became something else entirely, a force of nature that refused to allow harm to come to his family. Victoria recoiled slightly at the growl, but Alexander remained unfazed. "You're delusional, Miller," he sneered. "This charade is over." He made a subtle gesture, and one of the security men reached for the door. But Shadow was quicker. With a snarl, the dog lunged forward, snapping at the intruder's arm. The man stumbled back, swearing in pain. Henry stood his ground, not even flinching at the confrontation. "You'll leave this place," he said calmly, "or I will make sure you never get near Hope again." The Blackwoods exchanged a brief glance, and for the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. This wasn't the easy victory they had assumed it would be. They had underestimated Henry, Shadow, and what they were willing to protect. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the growl of the dog and the patter of rain against the cabin's roof. And then, with a look of seething frustration, Alexander spoke. "This isn't over, Dr. Miller. You can't hide forever." He turned sharply, signaling his men to follow. Victoria hesitated, her eyes lingering on Hope's crib, but she said nothing. In the end, they turned and left, retreating into the storm with their tails between their legs. Henry let out a long breath, his whole body shaking. He had faced down the Blackwoods and won, for now. But the battle wasn't over. It never would be, not as long as they still breathed. Later that night, as the storm subsided and the rain tapered off, Henry sat on the porch, watching the fading light of day. Shadow lay beside him, ever watchful, while Hope rested inside, blissfully unaware of the danger they had just faced. For the first time in a long time, Henry allowed himself a moment of peace. They had survived, but there was more to come. He could feel it, like a storm on the horizon, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family. "Thank you," Henry whispered to Shadow, his voice soft with gratitude. The dog's ears perked, and he rested his head on Henry's knee, a silent promise of loyalty. This journey has been one of incredible transformation for both Henry and Shadow. They have fought for the love and safety of a child against the odds and the shadows of their past. Through love, sacrifice, and determination, they have shown that family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to form. The Blackwoods' attempt to take Hope was more than just about control. It was about denying a future. But now, Hope is surrounded by love, loyalty, and the safety of a family that will stop at nothing to protect her. What did you think of this story? Which part touched your heart the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel and hit the notification bell to get more touching stories about the power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds we form with those we hold dear.